The Israeli army conducts a relatively large overnight ground operation inside Gaza before withdrawing, fueling concerns about whether it's the start of a full-scale ground invasion. South Korea, the United States, and Japan strongly condemned recent arms transfers from North Korea to Russia and expressed deep concerns about any transfer of nuclear-related technology in return. South Korea's economy expanded by 0.6% from July to September on the back of exports and private spending. It remains to be seen whether the economy can achieve its growth target this year. It's October 26, 2023. This is News Center.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon. We begin with the war in the Middle East. Overnight, the Israeli army conducted a relatively large ground raid inside Gaza, targeting Hamas positions and withdrew. Israel calls this as the biggest incursion of the current war, and it's fueling concerns about whether it's the start of a full-scale ground invasion, despite calls for a delay. Lee-who has our top story.
In an indication of an escalation in the Gaza Strip, Israeli military forces said they carried out a, quote, relatively large operation in the enclave overnight on Thursday. Israel's army radio described it as the biggest incursion of the current war. The military said the targeted raid was carried out in preparation for the next stages of combat. The strike follows Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's comment on Wednesday that Israel was ready for a ground invasion.
Simultaneously, we are preparing for a ground invasion. I will not elaborate on when, how, or how many. I will also not elaborate on the various calculations we are making.
According to reports by the Wall Street Journal, Israel has agreed to a U.S. request to delay its expected ground invasion so that Washington could place air defenses in the region to protect U.S. troops as early as later this week. It also reported the U.S. is trying to get out as many of the 200-plus hostages taken by Hamas during its October 7 attack as possible before the invasion. U.S. President Joe Biden denied making such requests.
No. What I have indicated to him is that if that's possible to get these folks out safely, that's what he should do. It's their decision. But I did not demand it. I pointed out to him, if it's real, it should be done.
Meanwhile, on Thursday morning, fires and smoke plumes were seen rising in the border area between Israel and Lebanon. The source of the fires has not yet been verified. Israel has carried out intense strikes on Gaza after the Hamas attack on Israeli communities earlier this month that killed some 1,400 people. According to Gaza's health ministry, more than 6,500 Palestinians have been killed in the attacks as of Wednesday. Lee-who, Arirang News.
It's been almost 3 weeks since the Israel-Hamas war sparked concern not only over humanitarian crisis, but over rising economic risks in terms of volatility in energy prices and rising inflationary pressure. Business correspondent Shin-ha is here to talk about the economic impact that could play out in the Middle East and beyond. Thanks for joining us, Ha-young.
Great to be back, Jung-min.
So how is the economy performing these days when it comes to oil prices?
Well, since the beginning of the Israel-Hamas conflict, as you know, all eyes have been on global oil prices, as that can push up inflation both at home and abroad. So reflecting the concern, global oil prices jumped more than 4% on the third day of the Israel-Hamas conflict, and it was the biggest one-day gain since April 3rd. However, for the past few days, fluctuations have been less significant, even though oil prices rebounded as of Wednesday after prices fell on Tuesday for the third straight session. And this came amid diplomatic efforts from a number of countries to release hostages. And also, Israel has not yet launched a ground invasion due to international pressure, alleviating concerns about disruptions in oil supply. And in fact, as Israel and Palestine are not major oil-producing nations, experts expect that the impact on global oil prices will be limited. However, it's too early to predict the actual economic impact as it's uncertain how the conflict will unfold. And Bloomberg Economics has examined the possible economic impact under 3 scenarios. And those are Israel's ground invasion of Gaza, a multi-front war in Gaza where Lebanon and Syria get involved, and lastly, a direct conflict between Israel and Iran. Bloomberg estimates a war between Israel and Iran could push oil prices to $150 a barrel and drop global growth to 1.7%. And this is because of Iran's proximity to the Strait of Hormuz, a vital oil trading route. Take a listen.
If Iran disrupts oil tankers passing through the Strait of Hormuz or even blocks the strait, it could significantly impact global oil prices. This is because about 30% of the volume of the world's total oil consumption passes through that route.
And Hyung, is there any concern over the supply chain? It's been a significant issue when economists talk about the war in Ukraine.
That's a good point, Jung-min. Given that both Russia and Ukraine are both key producers of energy, raw materials, and even agricultural commodities, concerns about potential disruption in the supply chain were already acknowledged in the early stage of the war. But in the case of the Israel-Palestine conflict, the region's contribution to global raw material production is not substantial. And in fact, according to a report from the Korea International Trade Association, Israel and Palestine each account for less than 0.4% of South Korea's overall trade, meaning the effect is expected to be insignificant. However, an expert said it's necessary to diversify the supply chain of certain items. Take a listen.
South Korea heavily depends on Israel for key items, including bromine and airborne radar for aircraft. With an import dependency exceeding 90% for these items, a prolonged Israel-Hamas conflict could pose challenges for South Korea. Therefore, it is crucial to diversify the supply chain to secure alternative suppliers.
He added that particularly high-tech industries could face supply chain disruptions as Israel is a hub for this sector.
Israel is a hub for advanced industries. There are Intel's chip factories and R&D centers and sales offices of South Korean firms like Samsung and SK Hynix. A prolonged war could potentially disrupt the supply chains in these advanced industries.
And what other problems might South Korea face, and what response can we expect?
Well, in general, when situation globally becomes uncertain, there is a tendency for people to show their preference for safe haven assets. And in this case, I'm referring to the US dollar. And that would also mean the Korean won depreciating against the greenback. And this is the concern that the Bank of Korea has these days. And despite an unchanged interest rate gap between Seoul and Washington due to the BOK's latest rate freeze, the governor of the bank said that there is a rising concern that a stronger dollar due to the conflict in the Middle East could lead to capital outflows. And meanwhile, to prevent fuel companies from taking advantage of the increased volatility in oil prices, the government decided to strengthen on-site inspections. So I guess we'll have to wait and see how the conflict in the Middle East will develop to see what further economic impact there will be.
Right, we will have to wait and see. Thanks for your report, Hyung.
My pleasure.
Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo issued a joint statement today strongly condemning recent arms transfers from North Korea to Russia. The 3 top diplomats also expressed concerns about any transfer of nuclear or ballistic missile-related technology in return. Choi Min-jung reports.
South Korea, the United States, and Japan's top diplomats have issued a joint statement condemning North Korea and Russia's arms transfers. In the statement released Thursday, Seoul's Foreign Minister Park Jin, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and Japanese Foreign Minister Yoko Kamikawa strongly denounced Pyongyang's provision of military equipment and munitions to Moscow for use against Ukraine.
Despite repeated warnings from the international community, Russia and North Korea have continued to pursue military cooperation, including arms transfers. The joint statement was adopted to show that South Korea, the US, and Japan take this issue seriously.
The statement underlined that several deliveries of weapons from North Korea to Russia have been completed.
The US disclosed through a White House briefing in mid-October that a container departing from North Korea was moved to a Russian ammunition warehouse near a Ukrainian battlefield. The issue has been continuously tracked through cooperation between Seoul and Washington.
The statement also underlined how Pyongyang is seeking assistance to advance its military capabilities in return for its support to Russia. This includes the potential for any transfer of nuclear or ballistic missile-related technology to the regime. Officials emphasized that arms transfers and technical cooperation related to the North's weapons of mass destruction, ballistic missiles, or conventional weapons programs would violate multiple UN Security Council resolutions, which contain restrictions that Russia itself voted for. The three countries urged Pyongyang and Moscow to abide by UNSC resolutions and immediately cease all activities that violate them. Last month's summit between Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin reinforced global concerns about a potential bilateral arms deal. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
President Yoon is now back in Seoul after state visits to Saudi Arabia and Qatar. The 6-day trip included massive deals and investment pledges for infrastructure, automobiles, and smart farms. Here's our Kim Do-yeon for a wrap-up of the visits.
President Yoon Suk-yeol landed at Seoul Air Base on Thursday morning after his 2-state visits to Saudi Arabia and Qatar. It is the first time that a South Korean president has visited either country for a state visit. The numbers show the weight of the 6-day trip. In Riyadh, 51 deals and memorandums of understanding worth $15.6 billion were signed. And in Qatar, around a dozen deals and MOUs were signed, adding up to $4.6 billion. The top office, tying this with the state visit to UAE earlier this year, dubbed this new era of cooperation as the Middle East 2.0.
With this trip, a playing field of more than $70 billion has been made in the Middle East since Yoon's inauguration. To expand the market for the people and companies of South Korea for a more abundant future to come more quickly is the reason why President Yoon went to the region of hot deserts.
As previously reported, some specific notable deals include the contract between the state-run Korean National Oil Corp and Saudi Arabia's state-run oil giant Saudi Aramco to create a joint crude oil reserve of 5.3 million barrels in the South Korean city of Ulsan. In Qatar, a $3.9 billion contract was made between South Korea's Hyundai Heavy Industries and Qatar's state-owned petroleum company Qatar Energy for the construction of 17 LNG carriers. And other deals expanded into new sectors not normally associated with the Middle East. In fact, the majority of the deals came from new industries such as smart farms, AI, and electric vehicle production, as both Saudi Arabia and Qatar prepare for the post-oil economy with Saudi Vision 2030 and Qatar National Vision 2030.
South Korea and Middle Eastern countries building ships and EVs together and drawing a map of new industries was hard to imagine in the past. These are big changes and we rate this as a remarkable outcome.
Another highlight of the trip was when President Yoon Suk-yeol arrived at Future Investment Initiative, personally driven to the event by Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The surprise move included the Crown Prince telling President Yoon that next time they get in a car together, he hopes it is a Hyundai EV produced in Saudi Arabia, referring to the new Hyundai Kia EV plant to be made after a deal during Yoon's trip. Meanwhile, on the trip with President were 139 business leaders from South Korea as President Yoon attended business forum in both countries. Also, as he does on overseas trips, Yoon took the time to meet college students, emphasizing bilateral people-to-people exchanges and motivating the young generation to contribute to global prosperity. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
President Yoon attending the 44th memorial of former President Park Chung-hee's passing at Seoul National Cemetery highlighted the can-do spirit of South Koreans, something he said fueled the country's rapid modernization in the 1960s and 70s. In his address, Yoon said that the late president's can-do spirit instilled confidence in Koreans, cultivated Korea's modern industries such as steel and shipbuilding. Yoon said this spirit must be renewed to overcome numerous crises and take another leap forward as a nation. It's the first time that a sitting president of Korea has attended the memorial service for the late Park, who was assassinated in 1979 after an almost two-decade-long rule that has been subject to controversy. It's also the first face-to-face meeting in 18 months for Yoon and Park's daughter, former President Park Geun-hye, who is considered a potentially influential figure among conservative circles ahead of next year's parliamentary elections. South Korea's economy expanded by 0.6% from July to September on the back of exports and private spending. It remains to be seen whether the economy can achieve its growth target this year. Our correspondent Lee Soo-jin explains.
South Korea's economy recorded a slight growth during the July to September period. Data from the Bank of Korea released on Thursday shows that the country's gross domestic product, a key indicator of economic growth, rose 0.6% on quarter during the third quarter of this year. This is the third consecutive quarter that the country has seen economic growth and the second straight quarter that the nation has seen an on-quarter economic growth of 0.6%. The central bank said the growth was mainly led by the increase in net exports as well as private spending, the two main drivers of South Korea's GDP. Net exports rose in the third quarter as total exports rose more sharply compared to total imports. Exports rose by 3.5% from the previous quarter thanks to recovery in shipments of semiconductors as well as machinery and equipment. Imports were up by 2.6% on the back of increased imports of petroleum products. Private spending rose by 0.3%, mostly driven by increased spending on food and accommodation. Government spending also increased by 0.1% as spending on social security benefits went up. Investment in construction grew by 2.2% on increased orders, but investment in facilities dropped by 2.7% due to sluggish demand for machinery. Despite the rise in both net exports and private spending, it remains uncertain whether the nation can reach the BOK's economic growth outlook due to global uncertainties.
There are growing uncertainties regarding how the recent geopolitical risks arising from the Israel-Hamas conflict and the continued interest rate hikes in the United States will impact our country.
But the officials said that although the central bank previously said that South Korea's economy will have to grow around 0.7% in both the third and the fourth quarter to meet this year's outlook, this was simply a rough estimate and that it's still possible for the nation's economy to grow 1.4%. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
The estimated earnings of South Korean auto giant Hyundai Motor Company for the July to September period this year have beat market expectations, recording an all-time high for the third quarter. The company announced on Thursday that its operating profit during the period is forecast to stand at 3.82 trillion won, or around $2.8 billion, soaring more than 146% on year. Also, Hyundai's operating profit from January to September this year nearly doubled compared to that last year. Hyundai attributed the earnings surprise to an increase in sales of high-margin sport utility vehicles within the country as well as solid overseas sales, particularly in North America, Europe, and India. As lumpy skin disease in cattle has affected at least 42 farms across the country in just a week, the authorities tightened its vaccination campaign. Our Geun-hye went to one of the farms to check out on-site disease prevention efforts.
Viral lumpy skin disease is spreading in South Korea, with the number of farms found to have confirmed cases on the rise. The outbreak was first discovered in Chungcheongnam-do province on October 20th, and since then more at other farms in the province as well as in neighboring Chungcheongbuk-do province, Gyeonggi-do, Jeollabuk-do, and Gangwon-do provinces, and Incheon. This has led to the culling of over 2,000 cattle. As part of the response, authorities have announced the introduction of an additional 4 million doses of the vaccine by the end of this month, and that all cattle in the country will be vaccinated by early November. The Central Disaster Management Headquarters is currently carrying out vaccinations, focusing on farms close to where outbreaks occurred, using the 540,000 doses of pre-secured vaccine. This farm in Gyeonggi-do province is vaccinating all 104 cattle in its herd.
The vaccination of all cattle on the farm has been completed according to the government's manual, and we are keeping strict vehicle control measures to prevent the spread of the disease. Also, I'm trying my best to control parasites, since the virus is transmitted by blood-sucking insects. When feeding the animals in the morning and evening, I am spending more time observing the cattle to check for symptoms.
Local governments are actively promoting disease preventive measures, including the operation of disinfection facilities, as well as pest control measures, as lumpy skin disease is transmitted by blood-feeding insects. The mortality rate is under 10%, and symptoms include skin nodules and lower milk production. While the disease does not pose a threat to humans in any way, farm owners are concerned.
I believe that it is most important for individual farm owners to pay careful attention to prevent the disease from spreading. I am seriously concerned about the lumpy skin disease spreading to my farm and leading to a culling of all the cattle.
The Central Disaster Management Headquarters has placed restrictions on the movement of cattle on farms in regions neighboring areas where lumpy skin disease has been found until vaccination is complete. Authorities say, considering the period required for antibodies to form, the next 3 weeks are crucial. Geun-hye, Arirang News.
U.S. President Joe Biden is expected to meet with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi this Friday at the White House for talks. Reuters says Wang could meet Biden at the same time as he is set to meet Biden's National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. It added it's unclear how substantial their interaction will be. AP says talks during the Chinese top diplomat's 3-day visit could include various regional and global issues, as well as a recent vessel collision in the South China Sea. Wang will also likely discuss an agenda for next month's possible U.S.-China summit at the APEC gathering in San Francisco. Over in the U.S., a shooting spree killed at least 22 people and injured dozens in Maine on Wednesday local time. This happened at a bowling alley and a bar in the town of Lewiston. Though exact numbers were not given, it's been reported that 50 to 60 people have been injured. The local police department has identified a person of interest as 40-year-old Robert Card, and an intensive manhunt is underway. Police earlier posted 3 photographs of a suspect pointing what appeared to be a semi-automatic rifle, in addition to a picture of a white SUV asking the public for help in identifying either.
A surge of Arctic air will settle in overnight, bringing much breezier conditions tomorrow. Most regions will see a drastic drop in morning temperatures. For Seoul, lows will be plummeting to 8 degrees Celsius, causing bigger contrast in daily temperatures. A similar weather pattern of cold mornings and warm daytimes is expected for the next few days. Some lingering showers are expected until the morning hours. The Seoul metropolitan area and Gangwon-do province will see 5 to 40 millimeters. The surrounding regions, including Chungcheong-do province, will see around 5 to 20. After the rain, there will be an influx of fine dust from overseas. For tomorrow daytime, central regions and Jeollado province will see dust levels standing in the bad category. For the morning commute, make sure to wear a mask that can filter out the dust particles. Tomorrow, Seoul will be starting off at 8 degrees, Gwangju and Chuncheon at 11. As for the daily highs, Seoul will get up to 19 degrees, Daejeon and Gwangju 18, Busan will be reaching 21 degrees. Sunny skies will make a return this weekend, but wide temperature gaps will continue. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is News Center for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.